Hey, Peaceniks. Today's guest is a man who at 19 years old was introduced to the U.S. criminal justice system, where he spent 4 years in a federal penitentiary for stealing millions of dollars. It was in prison where he was first introduced to the world of drugs, and a halfway house upon his release when he first began using them. And in failing drug tests and violating his terms of parole, he would end up spending a total of another 4 years in prison. He is a fellow North Carolinian, and he joins us on the Peace on Drugs podcast to tell his story. He is currently writing a memoir, so Peaceniks, Peaceaholics, Peaceheads, today's guest is Marc Suarez. Let's hit this bomb.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Drugs are menacing our society.
What are your thoughts on the drug problem?
I had a great time doing drugs.
So tonight, from our family to yours, from our home to yours, thank you for joining us.
This is the Peace on Drugs.
Yeah, man, what's going on?
Not much. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm
Yeah,
good. Thanks for asking me to have me on.
Yeah, thanks for being on. Hey, Kevin's a good friend of mine. He said you'd be a great guest, and you guys go back a while. So,
Yeah.
sorry. So thanks for doing this. Go ahead.
Yeah, man, I was listening to some of the podcasts today. I don't know. You got some pretty great guests on there. I don't know that I'll hold up with them, but
Well, the idea
fun.
behind telling a story, because my podcast is about, the war on drugs. And I was listening to this journalist explain that when you want to tell a story, you have to tell the whole story. So you can't just talk to people who are, there's so many sides to the war on drugs. And, and he said you had a unique story. You spent time in prison, and you have a story about, was it drug violation, stuff like that. So it's just to tell the whole story, we have to tell all angles. And I think your angle will be a great something to add to the story.
Awesome.
So
Yeah,
what's your story? Let's talk about it.
So it's almost I don't know where to start. To have ended up in this place, I started in a much different place. I was raised here in North Carolina. Mom and dad were great. I was raised up a real, very strict Christian, Jehovah's Witnesses, if you've ever heard of them.
Mm-hmm.
The whole life, just walk the straight and narrow. One problem though with some of, I guess specifically that religion, maybe other religions too, is to them, if you smoked a cigarette, you slept with your girlfriend, you killed somebody, all the same. There's no graduation there. So what happens is as a late teenager, you start smoking cigarettes and smoking weed and sleeping with your girlfriend, and there's no good moral compass there. So made some really bad decisions at 19. Had never been in trouble before, and end up in federal prison for 4.5 years. Just the softest, most unstreet, nerdy kid you could imagine in federal prison. So that was an experience. Actually, for the most part, it was pretty great. Yeah, I mean, besides the fact that you're in prison, I mean, you can build a life in there, and as long as you don't piss off the wrong people, I mean, you can be okay. So I taught GED classes in there, and I ran the GED program at 2 different prisons, and that was kind of the key, because when the guys graduated, they got to go to the visiting room and actually sit down with their family. And then after the graduation, they got to sit there and eat some cake. So with their kids, that is an unimaginable gift for a lot of them. And so if you're the person that holds the key to that, and you help all those guys pass a GED and get it, it ends up being pretty I mean, not a bad life, right? So pretty fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
Up to that point, I had never really done drugs. Smoked weed, drank, but I had never done anything like coke or heroin or crack or meth or anything. I wouldn't even know what they look like or what they're called, how you would get them, anything. It wasn't in my life. But being in prison, and especially in federal prison, 70%, maybe more of the guys that are there are drug offenders. And, that wasn't my offense.
What was your offense?
But so I worked for BB&T and figured out a way to steal a whole bunch of money. So I stole a whole bunch of money, millions of dollars.
Oh, wow.
And they weren't able. So it was weird back then. It was weird. They didn't have computers. There's a 2-day settle. 96.
96. Okay.
Yeah. So they were still using like the manual machines in banks. There's a 2-day float. We had to send all of our work to a central location. Supply checks back then really, everything took a couple of days. And so there was a weakness there, and I figured out how to, steal a bunch of money. And they weren't able to prove it. So they didn't know if I was the worst bank teller of all time, or I stole all that money. There's no way to know.
No, you were just a bank teller and you figured that out. That's pretty crazy.
So after that, I guess I kind of, felt, well, in for a penny, in from a pound. So my friend came up to me about a year later after that, and said, hey, I work for the post office. There are these trucks that you don't even know are postal trucks. It's a U.S. mail on the side, and they're full of mail. But in each one of those trucks, there's certain bags, you got to know what to look for, that are literally full of money. So all the money that comes out of the postal services at the end of the day, this truck goes around, collects the mail, collects the insured mail, and collects the deposits, puts it in the back of that truck. And it's like a $13 an hour contract guy driving. He has no idea. But some of them can have, millions of dollars on it. So I hijacked one of those trucks, and took all the money. But that was my downfall because, of course, the guy, my friend that worked in the post office, ended up getting in trouble, and through him, I did. So that's the very short, not successful story of the criminal career. Only times I ever got in trouble. But the thing about that is they were really, really mad, really angry about the post office thing. I didn't even know there's an entire federal law enforcement arm. The postal inspectors, they are no joke. They carry guns. They are fully invested federal agents. And all they do is the mail. Not like the FBI. There's a million different things. The Secret Service does a million different things. They all have these huge areas of responsibility, except the postal inspectors, they only do the mail. And something like this to happen here had never happened. And it was clean at the site. So there was no lead there through the actual robbery. And taking the truck. So, but eventually they got to my friend, they figured it out.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, but it all worked out. I was actually able to go in and work with the bank that I took all that money for. And in exchange for me telling them how I did it, so they could make sure no one could ever do it again, they cut my sentence in half.
Oh, wow. That's
yeah,
kind of like a catch me if you can kind of thing, where he ended up working for the FBI that they were chasing him. I mean, it's a little different, but it's pretty cool though.
It was such a different time. There weren't cameras in the drive-through. It was just, you couldn't do anything like that now. But yeah, so I ended up in federal prison, and everyone in there is, mostly a drug dealer. And remember, I had never really bought a drug before, even in my life. And now I was in there with all these guys, and it was really interesting to hear their stories. They, I guess we all have stereotypes, I guess most people of what those guys would be like. And in reality, it's so different. And each of the circumstances is so different. And so I had a front row seat to the overreach of the war on drugs. One of my closest friends, kind of a mentor, I got a life sentence for marijuana. He was a pilot for the CIA and flew back and forth for Ollie North.
About Kenny Kubinski?
Kenny Kubinski, yeah. He ended up, by the time I met him, he had already been in there for 20 or 25 years. He's home now. Kenny, if you're listening, I love you. But he was turned out to be one of the real leading proponents in the whole country of this restorative justice concept. And he was able to kind of mentor me in that. It was really interesting. And to participate in some of that, where you go into these rooms, you sit around in a circle, and then you have all these guys in there talking about who they hurt and what that meant, and to take it seriously. It was really cool. Really cool. So skip ahead, I guess. I get out in 2003, and within 6 months, I'm shooting cocaine, shooting heroin, just everything.
You started that while you were locked up is when you started using those things?
No, I got out, and they put you in a halfway house, which is a terrible idea, because you're in this house with all these people, and everybody just got out. And they're privately run, they're for profit, they're kind of a scam. It's really not well run facility. And that's where I started doing it. I actually met a girl in there who used to run a heroin ring at Temple University, and got released. And one day she was like, it'd be really sexy is if I shot you up. And I was like, all right.
That was your first time?
That was the first time. Yeah, that's how it started.
What did you think about it? Like when it hit you, what was because before you had only smoked marijuana before this, right?
Right. Well, drugs are great, right? That first time, of course, before you have negative consequences, or you don't have negative consequences, but it just exists. That feeling, the first time you do something, that feeling is going to exist on its own by itself, right? And with no context in your body or in your mind. So it was great, but it didn't change my life or anything. It's just that you start doing it more and more, and then all of a sudden, because you don't know any better, you realize you have a habit.
Mm-hmm. It happens for a lot of people, especially when you're using it to fill a void. When you've just got out of prison. What was your relationship with your family at that point?
It was good. My family was really amazing. They were there for me. They made the decision to stick by me. When I got out, my brother had a car for me. They made sure I had what I needed. It's very difficult when you get out. You don't have a driver's license, but most people, you don't have the documents you even need to get a driver's license or an ID. And the idea that most people get home after doing a long time in prison can go to the same drawer and they have their birth certificate and their social security card and all that. Just things happen over time. So it's very difficult to get started, to open a bank account, even to get a cell phone. So many things that we really take for granted. I remember walking down the street when I first got out, and I saw a woman pull up to a gas station, pulled up to the pump, got out, talking on her phone, swiped a card, filled her car up, got in her car, and drove away. And all of that just blew my mind, because I was so far away from being able to be in a position in life where I could have done any of those actions. Had a car, had a bank account, been on a phone, had somewhere even to go, obviously, and had a job and had my shit together. I remember thinking, it seemed out of reach, but my family helped me kind of get back established. I was very fortunate with that.
Yeah, I think people that don't have that the help from their family, it's like you say, it's a mountain you have to climb, but having somebody there for you to help push you up that mountain that's already up, they're already up on the mountain. And that's so important, because so many people, especially kids who come from regions that have been really hit hard by the drug war, inner city areas, that their fathers and their brothers, they've all spent time locked up, criminal records. They don't have a lot of them don't have careers because of criminal records they have. So they don't have that family support in the way that some of us, that I was lucky enough to have too. When I got in legal trouble, my mom was able to get a lawyer and, get out of things. And it was really fortunate to have that. I didn't have the experience with prison that you have, just jail a few times for drugs. But yeah, it's hard to climb out once you have that record, the rap sheet. And, you say you're trying to do these things, trying to get your life back, put it back together one piece at a time.
Yeah, I mean, the system, that's a huge opportunity. I know there are a lot of groups that work for that, but, the thing is about being locked up, you learn how to live successfully, but nothing about living successfully in prison translates to living successfully on the street. They're almost opposite. The ways that you have to be in there, the ways you have to think, the ways you have to be emotional or not be emotional, all of that is completely opposites when you get out. So you already get out, and everything that you're used to doing that is successful in your life, all these ways of being, you get out and it's not successful, and no one else is like that. So that's something that guys are dealing with. And then on top of that, just like to get a job, to get a license, to have a car, to get a bank account, to get to even know to set an appointment at DMV. I mean, you have to, it's the way things change so quickly. So yeah, it can be real difficult. I was fortunate. I was very fortunate. Not that it mattered, because I still kept doing drugs, right. And being in addiction.
Well, I was asking about your family's help because as a Jehovah's Witness, I grew up in North Carolina as well. I'm from Gastonia, and I grew up very religious, but we were Baptist. But I have a friend of mine who grew up Jehovah's Witness in Pennsylvania, and he was on the podcast. He was my 7th guest, and he told his story. But I don't know because he said it's family by family how strict they are with their religious codes. But in the Jehovah's Witness church, if you get caught doing drugs or anything, you can be disfellowshipped. And that happened to his best friend. His best friend got caught doing meth. They disfellowshipped him. He was in a really bad place, so they cut him off, and he ended up killing himself. And this happens to a lot of people once they start getting in trouble. They're like, until they find their way back to God, we won't talk to them. But your family wasn't like that, it sounds like.
So they weren't. So I was disfellowshipped as well. But when I first got home, so I was disfellowshipped, and my family did make that, decision, and I'll be forever grateful to them because they are extremely devout in that church, but they're not going to turn their back on me, right? But it was funny, since a little bit about this. When I got home, I went back to one of the meetings because I wanted to get reinstated just for my mom and dad, mm-hmm. right? Because now I'm home. I want to be able to be somewhat a part of their life. And so I went to one meeting, and one of the elders that I've known my whole life that I grew up with, he called me, said he wanted to talk to me. So I go meet him for coffee, and he asks me if I intend on coming back and getting reinstated. And I said, yeah, I know it's going to take a long time. Probably, with everything, I know it'll probably take a year, but I'm going to, I'll keep coming. So he told me they'd make a deal with me. He said, I know you're probably just doing it for your mom and dad, and we love your mom and dad. We'll reinstate you if after you're reinstated, you promise me you're not going to come. We don't want you there in the Kingdom Hall, but we'll reinstate you if you just kind of stay away. I wish I could remember the words used, but that was exactly what it was.
Wow. They didn't even ask if you actually were interested in being a part of the church?
No, I mean, I'm pretty sure they knew that I was not.
And you did.
I may have even, Yeah, no. So yeah, so that worked out. So like 2 weeks later, they reinstated me, and I've kept my word. I've never been back. And to this day, because my sister, my niece, my nephews, they're all very devout as well. But at least I'm able to be around them.
Yeah,
So,
that's amazing, because that's one thing I'm lucky about with the Baptist church, is that they're not quite like that with it. Like I've told them, over and over, that I don't believe in that stuff, and but that I have, respect for those. If you find happiness in it, then good for you. I'm happy for you. I'm not into it, and they don't push it on me too hard. I mean, every once in a while, my mom will call me and try to talk to me about the rapture or something like that, and I just tell her, that's your thing, Mom. I get it, but I'm not into it. And she says, promise me if we disappear, then that you'll change your mind. I was like, if you vanish, I can reconsider this whole thing. But until then, but yeah. So and so you're in North Carolina, also the Bible Belt. Where at North Carolina?
I'm in Fayetteville right now, but I moved down here for a job recently. But I've been in Raleigh the last years.
Well, Raleigh's a cool area. I've not been to Fayetteville. It's a military town. I've had some friends from there. But and Kevin said something about you living in Boone at some point. Or did he get that wrong?
I didn't live in Boone. I used to live in Winston-Salem, out near there.
Yeah, Winston-Salem's a cool town too.
It is. But so we're at the halfway house. This is a little relevant. Let me so I end up doing the exact same amount of time I did that we just talked about, again, for nonviolent drug violations.
You're violating your probation.
Yeah, I did 4 more years.
Wow.
Just for that. And so when we talk about, the system kind of being stacked against guys and girls that are just home from prison, you walk into a situation where you're free, but you always have this thing called supervised release, right? It's kind of like parole, but parole doesn't exist anymore in the federal system. So you have this thing called supervised release. So whenever you finish your sentence, no matter what, you have another sentence of being supervised by a probation officer. And in that sentence, however long it is, you can break rules, not laws, and it's really up to their discretion, and they can send you back. And I was incredibly bad at that system in the beginning because, they're drug testing you. And once you have one positive drug test, then they're drug testing you all the time, coming to your work, coming to your house, middle of the night. And so, so violated 3 times, all for that. And by the end, and so that's what addiction does, right? You lose your freedom over it. You go back, and then you come back out and you do the same thing. You end up getting caught into the same thing.
What would you say to somebody who would say, why don't you just not do drugs when you get out? Just go through your probation and don't do drugs. Now, I'm not saying I would ever say that, because I understand, but I'm asking what you would say to someone who would say that.
I'd say that's a great plan. I mean, I would have signed up for that plan. I thought it was a great plan, but it's not really that easy, is it?
It's not.
So, no, I mean, I went to, in the government's defense, they sent me to rehab. I mean, inpatient, like 90-day inpatient rehab. They sent me twice, as well as made me go to all the NA, AA, rational recovery. I've been all of them. I've all the rooms. They even sent me to a psychologist. But for me, my experience has been, until I was ready to quit, I wasn't going to quit. And then one day, I'm just ready to quit. And it's funny, ever since that day, I haven't done anything. And it's no more or less accessible than it ever was. And that's been 10 years ago since, but it is, it is crazy when you think about what I did in the beginning and that time that they said was appropriate punishment for that crime, right? 4.5 years. And then over here for drug use, I got the exact same sentence, basically 4 years. I just split it
Wow.
up, 2 years, a year, and a year. So that to me says that, something is clearly broken with how we view that stuff. Because other than that, I mean, I was actually living a good life, successful life, right? Like
Yeah,
I wasn't committing any other crimes, wasn't on the
Right.
street.
We were just using drugs.
know?
And I mean, that's constantly what our country seems to be doing. And all places all around the world we treat people who are using drugs, and some of them are sick, some of them are depressed, fighting depression, some of them just enjoy drugs, but whatever their reasons are, these are nonviolent people that are not a threat to society, and we're locking them up and ruining their lives. I mean, you won't get that time back.
I mean, ironically, looking back on it, that drug use was about escape for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I came out and just had, you're starting from nothing. It's very stressful. The world is not easy when you have all these felonies and everything that I did to myself, but still. So I'm using that as an escape from the reality, and that causes me to go back to prison.
And that's the problem with the punitive system, right? When we have a system that says, all right, for your crimes, here's your punishment, no rehabilitation. So when you get out, you just got punished. Your life is hard to put back together. There's a lot of stress and a lot of depression and things that can come with that would lead to somebody to want to escape, to want to do drugs, because facing your life with the way it was left after prison is a hard thing to face. So that's something a lot of people have to deal with. And then we have the system where let's test your urine. Let's see if you're escaping. Up, you are. Back into the system. More punishment, which is like, it didn't work the punishment's not helping. And psychologists have known this, scientists have known this for decades. Like, punitive systems don't cure crime. They create more crime. We need a rehabilitative system, but the private prison industry doesn't like that. They want to create more criminals, more prisoners.
Yeah, and it never ends, right? It never ends. So last week I was actually served with a civil lawsuit from the government for $94,000. They're still coming after me. This has been 26 years later, and
Wow.
they're still coming after me, right? So, and it has been, but it's like, at what point, at what point are you rehabilitated? I mean, at what point? I mean, I have a nonprofit. I volunteer at an animal shelter. I haven't been in any trouble in 10 years. I have a pretty good job. I have a house with 2 dogs. I mean, I contribute. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
After 26 years, 12 years of being home and they're coming after my house now.
Wow.
I mean, it almost just makes you laugh, right?
not really. I guess it's a good way to look at it. You have to like Jesus Christ, what do you guys want?
Yeah, for sure. So, what would it's funny you asked me if I did drugs when I was in prison. I don't know how it is at different places, but it was interesting to see that in that ecosystem. You had everything that there was on the street that you had in there, and people with habits, heroin habits, cocaine, everything. It was interesting to watch that. But of course, I think people are doing it for the same reason too, right? Escape, the ultimate escape, because you're in prison.
Right.
But they would get caught. This is the interesting point why I brought it up. They would get caught with heroin, not just dirty for heroin in your urine, like with heroin.
Right.
And they would get a write-up. So unless you were some sort of kingpin, I mean, you could get caught with those drugs, or get caught with needles while you were inside. You just got wrote up and you went to segregation for 2 weeks and you came back, and that was it.
So it didn't add any time to your sentence.
Didn't add any time to your sentence.
Could it affect your chances of parole? Affect chances of early parole or anything?
If you were getting ready to get out and go to the halfway house and you got busted with something like that, sure. But halfway house is only the last 6 to 12 months of your sentence, and that could be different now. I don't know how. For when I was there, that's how it was. So I mean, worst case scenario, but they're so overcrowded, they would probably have pushed you out anyway.
Gotcha. Now I'm wondering, is it more? It's got to be a little bit more of a risk to developing a heroin habit in prison, because there's a chance you get busted, you're going to be without your heroin and have to go through withdrawals for a certain amount of time before you can get more.
There's a lot of problems with it. There's that. There's the issue of how much it was. So if you think a match head, literally the head of a match, that was anywhere between $50 and $100.
Jesus.
So you can't snort that because it's not even enough. Like it won't even register. So you have to shoot it. So now you're in prison and you have to have needles.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole difference. I've seen the craziest stuff people use for that. It'll be a needle at one end, at the other end, there's no telling what it'll be or how it works for them to do that.
I can only imagine. That's some scary shit. Yeah, there's no sanitation involved. I mean, it's a sad situation for someone who has an addiction and ends up in a situation where they're using makeshift syringes to shoot up a extremely overpriced small amount of whatever, black tar heroin or whatever they have. Because I mean, I've done black tar on the streets, and I think we paid I think it was like $50, but it was for a huge ball of it, enough to split with a few people. So yeah, that's crazy. Match head for, we say $50 to $100. And then, so how do you get money in prison? You're not making enough money in your wages with little jobs. You count on family members and the gang affiliation.
Yeah, and you have to have money to live there. You know, it's they really don't give you anything. I mean, they give you food, of course, and a bed. But I mean, if you want anything beyond that, I mean, if you want a pair of tennis shoes instead of the prison issue boots, you have to buy them. If you want sweats to go to the rec yard, you have to buy them. If you want food, obviously commissary, you have to buy it. If you want a toothbrush that's real and not this big and super cheap, you have to buy it. So yeah, you can either, you have your family. I mean, most people have a hustle. And then so there's always a currency. So when I was there, the currency was stamps. So a stamp was a quarter. So it, yeah, if I'm getting heroin from you, I'm probably just gonna have my family or a friend on the street send it to your people. But for regular stuff, buying a honey bun, betting on the football game, paying for a haircut, that was all with stamps. So book of stamps is a $5 bill.
Okay.
Back then, that's how that worked. They ended up phasing that out, and they started using cans of mackerel. It was so funny right when I left, because you'd look and you'd see guys with pillowcases full of mackerel, because used to be you got $10 and 2 books of stamps. Now you had to have 10 cans of mackerel. So yeah, they always change. They always come up with some sort of tender.
That's crazy. I mean, even the Jewish concentration camps, they had, I was reading this book, Man's Search for Meaning, and their currency was cigarettes. They said you knew a man was about to die when he smoked a cigarette, because that was his currency, and that means he gave up. But it's so why is it that they can't use, they don't use money? What's wrong with using a $5 bill as a $5 bill?
I think the idea is that you can gamble more easily with it, or maybe if you were able to have hard currency, you could bribe a guard. I mean, to be honest with you,
so you weren't allowed to have currency, like actual money.
Right.
Oh, so that's
no. You had a commissary account, and that's it. So you had to have something to use for that.
That's interesting. So it plays out naturally that people will use currency. You take away their currency, they'll find currency. That's we're trading.
Absolutely, it'll be, and then they crack down on the cans of mackerel, and there's something else. you could always designate something and call it a currency, right? Clamshells.
Yeah.
I mean, and anything. So yeah, and I think it's come along some way from that now. I mean, now, you know, they have computers and emails and you know, iPads and all kinds of stuff. It's something different, but that's what it was then.
Got you. So I was going to ask you another thing. Have you heard this person named William Leonard Pickard? He was arrested for allegedly making acid, a lot of acid. The DEA predicted almost all acid around the world was his. He denies having any part of it. But anyway, he was serving a double life sentence. And in 2020, he was released. He was in his 70s. So the Kenny Kabinski kind of 2020 thing, was it COVID? That because basically COVID, a lot of they were kind of like, let's just let some of these old people out. Like they're serving this time. It doesn't make sense. They're not a threat. Was that part of it, you think?
It certainly could have been. I know that Kenny had a lot of people trying to get, you know, pardons, trying to get, you know, he's very healthy, so he couldn't get compassionate release. But let's see if it, you know, and he did so much. But I think eventually some law change helped Kenny because I think that when they repealed mandatory minimum sentencing laws, and they made it, maybe that helped him. I'm not sure.
Gotcha.
But
curious to know how many people serving nonviolent drug offenses, especially the elderly. I mean, the fact that we have anybody in their 70s who is a nonviolent, I don't care how many drugs they smuggled. If they're in their 70s and they weren't violent, then let's get them out. It's just stupid. Like, why are we paying to keep them locked up?
I mean, it makes no sense. You know, and a lot of that goes back to probably prosecutorial misconduct. But it's also the way the laws are written. You know, you have judges too with mandatory minimums back then that, you know, their hands were tied. But yeah, I mean, it certainly did. And it's funny, you know, it used to break my heart talking to Kenny. He would, you know, he'd participate in efforts to try to get him released, but he wasn't personally. So you see guys, they spend every spare second in the law library and trying to beat their case and appeals and do the most outlandish maneuvers to try to get, you know, their sentence reduced. Kenny didn't. He was focused on being a good person and living a good life and trying to help people, honestly. You know, he worked in the education department. Like I said, he did restorative justice. He taught crafts. I mean, he had this life, and that was his idea. Was he's going to live that life to the best, you know, of the means that he could, and that the rest was in God's hands. And so yeah, when I did see that he had been released, I know I got a letter from him right before that, and he said that there were some things happening, and that's all he said. And the next thing I know, he got released. So, I mean, I don't know what purpose Aaron was served by having him in prison for 25 years, or you know, the guy that you said, I'm sure he's not out here at his age cooking up batches of LSD again.
Wish he was, but I mean, there's a different, you know, there's a difference in different drugs. I think that LSD should be legalized and regulated, and the idea that it just flows through the streets and you don't know what you're buying is ridiculous. But anyway, that's off subject. The idea that people are locked up for all different things. It's not just the elderly who are no longer violent, but people that weren't violent in the first place shouldn't be locked up. I mean, I was watching Bill Maher last night, and he was talking about the crazy people on, you know, the new liberal movements where they're like, let's legalize crime. Like, this is happening in some, you know, Oregon places where they're like, we're going to stop arresting for small theft and stuff like that, which I do disagree. I mean, I agree with him that that's ridiculous. You have to have law and order. But I think the movement is just misguided. They should look at it not like we're going to stop arresting for shoplifting under $250. They should look at it as we're going to stop arresting and giving you a permanent record and treating you like a criminal. A lot of these are kids, you know, you're going to get arrested. We're going to stop you from stealing from people, but then we're going to help you stop doing that. We're going to, you know, not going to give you a criminal record, because some of these kids just, they don't, you know, poverty is a big issue, right? If the kids that don't come from poverty don't usually shoplift unless they're just trying to impress somebody that, you know, they don't have, you know, to have the cool jacket. They just tell their parents to use the credit card. So I think fixing poverty should be more important, a goal that we focus on versus harsh crimes for people who are shoplifting and stuff like that.
I mean, you know what drives me absolutely insane, it gets me really angry, and few things do, is, you know, when you hear people, you know, talk about people that come out of those bad situations, maybe inner city poverty, you know, and believe me, I've known so many of these guys over the years that I got to know really well, and they really do exist in a situation where they don't see a lot of options, right? I mean, the options exist, but they're not doing them any good. And then you hear people, and this is what makes me angry, they say, well, so-and-so came out of there and he became a doctor, or he became a lawyer. And that's fantastic. But not everybody can be doctors and lawyers. And not everyone can even understand that those options exist and that they can reach them, because all they're surrounded by are examples of not that, right?
Exactly.
And so a lot of guys told me, you know, this was like, you know, I had two choices. You know, I could, you know, sell drugs or whatever. I mean, that was it. If they wanted to better themselves, if they wanted to try to get out of that situation, if they want to try to even support their family, that's what they knew to do. And so, you know, more than anything, I think being able to deal with those kids in those situations, and, you know, make sure the opportunities reach them, and that that they're even aware of those options, and that they're real. And even the kids that know, yeah, they know they can go to school and then college and then whatever. It just doesn't seem real. It's not realistic to them.
I completely agree with you. And that's our country's mentality, is pick yourself up, you can do it. And they love those stories that you're talking about. The one person that made it out, that's all they need, is one person to point at and say, well, he did it, therefore you should be able to do it. It's like, well, there's going to be somebody that just happened to get the right mix of DNA, or had the right family member that guided them, or something that happened to them that just made them see it, keep their eye on the prize, or just had that drive. And that one person is not everybody. The other kid that, you know, suffer a lot of these kids suffer from PTSD, from abuse or different violence that they've seen growing up. And then the kids that don't suffer from that might, you know, become successful, then you point at them and say, why aren't you doing it? It's like, well, have you mentally evaluated the difference between the two? Because I guarantee there's going to be a lot of differences there, but they don't care. It's all pick yourself up by your own bootstraps. And there's also a huge racist thing about this, because then what we do is we look at entire groups of people and we say, well, why isn't your group doing as good as our group? Because you had the same opportunities as us. So that clearly means there's something wrong with the African-American community. And I've heard different excuses for this. Oh, it's because of the breakdown of their family. It's like, well, you're the one breaking down their fucking family by arresting all of them. But the idea, this bootstrap mentality, we have to get past it and realize that if we have a society that has a safety net that will help the poor and help people get jobs and create jobs, then we can pull people out of poverty. And we can't just expect them to do it themselves, especially as jobs are literally being lost every day to automation. We're seeing the jobs disappear.
Well, you know, don't show me the doctors and lawyers, you know, the one or two that came out of that city. Show me the plumbers and the project managers and the people that you went to school and got a degree or picked up a trade and became successful. You know, that's what you don't see, right? That's what you don't see. You might see someone become a doctor, a lawyer, or go pro in a sport. But the opportunities that are there to just be, you know, upper middle class and normal, and success, and have a stable, successful life, that's what's not really available there.
And it would be more realistic. to show children those people will be more realistic instead of the hero worship where it's like you're either this or you're nothing.
Right, exactly. But coming out of my neighborhood, all the kids I grew up with are all like that kind of thing. Regional sales managers, or whatever, and are successful, but are not, or didn't hit the stratosphere by any stretch of the imagination. But the majority of all the kids in my neighborhood ended up okay and fairly successful, just like their parents. So, I don't know what the solution is, but I can tell you that, a lot of the kids that I met from the inner cities that, that turned to dealing drugs and then ended up in prison, they didn't really want to do it. They wasn't like their dream. They were smart. On that level, the ones that I was locked up at the federal prison, they were the upper echelon of the whatever organizations. So they were smart, they were ambitious. But I mean, if you ask them, like, why did you choose this? Why didn't you? I mean, they would laugh at you. Mm-hmm. That they would laugh at you. So, I mean, one kid I knew was they're great artists, great, they're humans, they have talents, but they just don't have opportunities. And that, I mean, I know that this is a podcast about drugs, but that all ties together.
As well,
whether using.
It's not just a podcast about drugs. It's about the war on drugs, which is the main focus. And yes,
right.
I like to do drugs. I've always liked drugs. I also think drugs can be dangerous for some people. I think addiction is a serious problem. Overdose obviously is a problem. These are all problems that are worse under prohibition. But I'm not just pro drugs. I'm more for the institutionalized, basically violence against our own people, which is the arresting of nonviolent people. We have more citizens of our own citizens behind bars than any other nation in the world. And we call ourselves the land of the free, and we sing songs about it proudly. I think we need to, if we want to be that, we should be that, but we need to put our money where our mouth is and be the land of the free and let these nonviolent people out of prison immediately. So that's where I'm at with this whole thing. Well, I guess thanks for being on here. We covered a lot of ground, and
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. And maybe we get you back on here sometime next time if I'm up in North Carolina with Kevin. Of course, you're not in Charlotte. I always go to Charlotte when I go up there. That's where my family
I have to go to Charlotte too because I have to see him down there.
Well, then next time we go up to Charlotte, we'll hit you up. Maybe come out and hang out.
Sounds good, man. Thank you.
Thanks for being on here. I really appreciate it.
Have a good one.
All right, you too. All right, peace, Nicks. Thanks for listening. Remember, if you're enjoying what we're doing here, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at The Peace on Drugs, Instagram, Facebook. Go to www.thepeaceondrugs.com. Subscribe to our newsletter. And thank you so much for listening. And this music that you're hearing is Twiggy Branches. Check out Twiggy Branches on Apple, on Spotify, and peace out.
You pay for what you can't. You pay for what you can't. When you align yourself with the Phobia jet set. Bet head, bet high, moves hard, bucket and mine. So on, sending love east. Cocaine and smile, and watching the sunrise, watching it all, Sunset Boulevard. Are you my doctor? Are you my dealer? Are you my What you get, you pay for what you get, you pay for what you get, you pay for what you get. Are you my doctor? Are you my dealer? Are you my doctor? Are you my dealer? Are you my doctor? Are you my dealer? Are you my doctor? Are you my dealer?